recently. I was asked to give the keynote speech in Washington, and I said, well, how long do you want me to speak? They said, you got an hour. I took an hour and 5 minutes, which was an hour too long. And at the end of it, this little girl, there were about 1,000 people there, came up and said, Mister, your speech was long and boring. Turned around and walked away. A few minutes later, a man came up and said, you know, I saw you talking to my little daughter, Melissa. She's 4. She's at that awkward age where she just repeats whatever she hears. So I don't know what you were talking about, but so I will be brief today. And Lee Zeldin, what a great member of Congress, a rising star in the Republican Party as well as in the House. And he covered most of the important issues, so I don't want to be redundant, but I want to thank him for his leadership. I want to thank Speaker Edelstein for his leadership in presiding over the Knesset. You know, he is one of the heroes of the Soviet Jewry movement. We all knew who he was, a great leader, a courageous man, 3 years in prison, and that's no picnic, as you know. And now he's in a position where his strength and his fortitude is now more needed than ever. So I want to thank him for his very incisive remarks and for his leadership. No one has to tell anybody in this room that we live in dangerous times. The threat to Israel from Hamas and Hezbollah, among other threats, is serious and it is worsening. Only a strong Israel, and we know Israel is strong, and Israelis have an indomitable spirit, coupled with robust and predictable military and diplomatic support from the United States, can deter and mitigate the escalating threat. Tragically, and this was mentioned by my good friend Lee Zeldin, the egregiously flawed nuclear deal with Iran was riddled with gaps and one-sided concessions made by the previous administration. Taken as a whole, the agreement poses an existential threat to Israel, our allies in the region, and even poses significant threats to the United States. To its credit, the Trump administration has imposed further economic sanctions on Iran, most recently on November 5th, to pressure the terrorist state to alter its increased support for terrorism and its decades-long drive to acquire nuclear weapons and the ballistic missiles to quickly deliver them. Again, I don't have to tell anybody in this room, but anti-Semitism is exploding worldwide, especially in the Middle East, but also in Europe and even here in America. One of the hearings that I held, and I've held several, more than a dozen, one of those hearings we had a representative from Sweden who said that there are places in Sweden where the yarmulke cannot even be worn. That's how bad it has gotten there. We know it's happening in London and in Paris. Europe is facing a very serious problem, a rising tide, if you will, of anti-Semitism. In the United States, the FBI just reported that hate crimes targeting Jews and targeting Jewish institutions rose some 37% between 2016 and 2017 to a terrible 58% of all religiously motivated hate crimes. And just a few weeks ago, now in 2018, there was Pittsburgh. For the record, I've spent my entire 38 years as a member of Congress fighting anti-Semitism. And like you, I believe we all need to do more. In 1982, during my first term in Congress, I traveled to Moscow and Leningrad on the first of several trips to meet with Jewish refuseniks in their homes and to engage Soviet leaders on their behalf. I met with people like Yuli Kasharovsky, a great Hebrew teacher in Moscow who was singled out by the KGB, like Yuli Edelstein, for mistreatment by the KGB. For hours on end, and many in this room know it because you are people who emigrated from Russia, we heard stories of torture, psychiatric prisons, harassment of every kind. In one apartment, Eitan Sharansky's mother asked us to press the Soviets for medicine for her incarcerated son. As we all know, to obtain an exit visa, which is a universally recognized human right, at least on paper in the Soviet Union, was to invite the wrath of the KGB and other small-minded, morally stunted communist thugs. And again, Yuli Edelstein experienced that personally and told us briefly about that again tonight. A few years later, I traveled to Perm Camp 35, the infamous gulag where Sharansky had spent so much time. And I can tell you, meeting and videotaping 24 prisoners, and we argued for their release. Eventually, they all got out. It was what an insight into courage, men who were standing up against a gulag state and doing it with great, great fortitude. I've chaired several hearings and authored many pieces of legislation, but one of them that was the most important came out of a hearing in 2002. I recommended that we do within the auspices of the OSCE, not a common word here in the United States, but like NATO, it is an important organization of democracy and human rights promotion. We came up with an idea to have conferences, and the big one was in Berlin in 2004. The takeaway from that was that unless there is sustained pressure on governments, there will be some lip service paid to combating anti-Semitism, but it will not be tangible and will not be sustainable. So tonight, and I conclude on this, I respectfully ask your help this week and into next, before Congress adjourns, in getting one of my House-passed bills designed to combat anti-Semitism out of the Senate. Briefly, in 2017, I introduced H.R. 1911, 1911, the Special Envoy to Monitor and Combat Anti-Semitism Act. It has 86 bipartisan co-sponsors, and get this, passed the House 393 to 2. The bill strengthens the State Department's Global Office on Combating Anti-Semitism, which I actually created by amendment in 2004, and raises the Special Envoy to the rank of Ambassador, who reports directly to the President of the United States. And that will mean an enhancing of the visibility, the focus, and an action plan to combat anti-Semitism. With your help, H.R. 1911 could easily pass this week. We've got to get the leadership of the U.S. Senate to just bring it up. I don't think anybody, or if anyone, it'll be a very small number, would vote against it. Thank you again this evening, and God bless you.